The library of ancient Alexandria in Egypt may have never burnt down according to claims. Alexandria, built by, of course, Alexander the Great, on the Mediterranean coast of Egypt near the Nile, where the Nile empties into the Mediterranean Sea, near the mouth of the Nile, was one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. It was founded by Alexander the Great in the spring of 331 BC, and for about 1,000 years until the year 641 AD, when it was conquered by the Arabs. It was the undisputed queen of the Mediterranean, which, as a shining beacon, spread its material and spiritual brilliance throughout the world. For this reason, writers rightly called it the first and top of the cities and the most glorious. The city, according to the plan of the architect Xenocrates, that's Alexander the Great's architect, was divided into 5 districts, of which the most important was the Bruchion. It was the largest district of Alexandria, occupying 1/3 of the city, and included the most magnificent and impressive buildings, among which the royal gardens, the palaces, and the museum. The museum, which was the most important part of the palaces, had many apartments and functioned as a supreme intellectual institution. It was, in other words, a research institute with laboratories, scientific devices, observatories, reading rooms, classrooms, and lecture halls, etc. Scientists, artists, and generally people of letters and art lived and worked in this space, the best known of whom were Euclid, Aristarchus, Eratosthenes, Aristophanes of Byzantium, the physician Herophilus, and others. And the most important part of the museum was the library, the so-called the inside of Bruchios, the basilica, or the museum, known as to the general public as the Library of Alexandria. The Library of Alexandria, it was the main intellectual center of the Hellenistic era, and its history is intertwined with the effort to disseminate, collect, and philologically restore the literal texts of classical antiquity. Ptolemy I, the chosen savior, he was one of Alexander's generals. He was in charge of Egypt. In the last years of his rule, founded in Alexandria at the urging of the Demetrius Phalerum, the museum, the central point of scientific research, with a library of which it estimated that he placed 200,000 volumes. His successor, Ptolemy II, the chosen Philadelphus, doubled the number of its books, going up to 400,000 volumes. And let's remember all those who, of course, were handwritten at that time. The Library of Alexandria reached its greatest flourishing when Ptolemy III, Verietis, wishing to collect all the books of humanity, spent enormous sums on its enrichment. It's even reported that he borrowed from the Athenians and official manuscripts of the great tragedians, mortgaging an enormous sum of 15 talents. However, he refused to return them, fearing to lose the pledge. And it's also said that he ordered the manuscripts to be confiscated from the ships sailing to Alexandria, giving the owner an extra copy. After this activity, the Library of Alexandria included 700,000 volumes, according to other authors, 800,000 volumes. There is no clear evidence regarding the fate of this great institution, and especially its contents. The following questions naturally arise. But how many libraries did Alexandria have? In which district were they located? What was the fate of the libraries and their contents? The questions we'll try to answer are difficult and thorny. However, it's proven that Alexandria also had a second library, the so-called Library of the Serapio, because it was located near the temples of the Serapeum, also called or outside or Irakotis, a name it took from the suburb where it was housed. However, it was certainly much smaller than the museum library. The crown, the eternal beacon, the eternal light giver was the library of Bruchius, which remained known in history as the Library of Alexandria. Today, if we ask any Greek about the fate of the Library of Alexandria, they'll tell us that the library was completely destroyed, and in fact twice, the first time by Julius Caesar in 47 BC, and the second time by the Arabs when they conquered Alexandria in 641 AD. However, the question arises, was the library really destroyed, or is its alleged burning an invention of some diabolical circles who reap the knowledge from the scattered or stolen books of the library and today pose as great men? So here we'll examine the sources and try to prove some of the least satisfactory answers. The causes of the library from Julius Caesar, Cassius. Some argue that the great destruction of the library occurred 47 BC, when Julius Caesar's fleet was set on fire in the harbor of Alexandria by Ptolemy I's generals Achilles, and in the fire spread first to the shipyards and then to the buildings and on land, resulting in the destruction of the museum and the library becoming a byproduct of the fire. According to other historians, Julius Caesar ordered the burning of the Ptolemaic fleet with the same results. However, the event took place. Is it real, or have various historians reached incorrect conclusions due to the confusing or fictional information? Julius Caesar, besides being a great general, was also a writer, and his historic works, Commentary de Bello Gallico, Memoirs of the Gallic War, and De Bello Civili, of the Civil War, he does not mention any information about the alleged burning of the library. On the contrary, impressed by the beauty and the street plan of the buildings of Alexandria, he mentions, among other things, that the buildings of Alexandria are constructed in such a way that they were not easily consumed by fire. But the Roman historian Hirtius, who supplemented Caesar's work, also does not mention anything related to the alleged burning of the library. The first author to mention the burning of the library is a Roman historian, Titus Livius, who together with Tacitus and Sallust formed the trinity of great Roman historians, when he undertook after 29 BC to write the history of Rome up to his time. The question therefore arises as to why Livy Titus obtained this information, where he obtained it, since he himself never came to Greece or to gather information and data, as Roman scholars were accustomed to doing up until then. The data he cites in his history are reliable, since the critics of his work decided that Titus Livy, in his desire to write a history, did not notice or take into account at all the archaeological research of this time and of earlier generations, nor did he receive or judge seriously the various histories that he had at his disposal in order to point out their discrepancies. At this point, we should point out that Rome began to have its own Roman historians towards the end of the 3rd century BC, who became known to contemporary historians as chronographers. The only reliable information that they had to write about was early history of Rome, where lists of rulers and treaties of alliance. Otherwise, they had to use mythology and oral traditions. Livy relied on the chronographers, and so although his works are unreliable as a whole, they occasionally contain nuggets of information that seem to reflect accurate and genuine traditions. The task of the modern historian is to separate these nuggets from the murky, muddy waters in which they move. And here the following tragic comedy occurs. When Livy Titus writes about the alleged arson of the library, the Greek geographer Strabo is in Alexandria, sees the library, works on it, and describes its greatness. A century later, the Roman Seneca, in his work De Tranquillitate Animi X, mentions the burning of the library, referring to the history of Titus Livius. That is, he copies the writing of Livius without examining the validity of the writings. The Greek historian Cassius Dio, 155 AD to 235 AD, full name is Cassius Dio Kosenaos, who wrote Roman history up to 229 BC, in the Greek language, using the memoirs of Augustus, Hadrian, Tacitus, and Titus Livius as sources, states that when the column of Julius Caesar was set on fire in the port of Alexandria, only the grain warehouses of the port and collection of books that were there for export were burned. This fact seems to be the most true, since everyone knows that Alexandria supplied the whole world with papyrus books and copies of books. In the 2nd century AD, the Latin grammarian Gellius Aulus, in his work Attic Nights, copying the previous ones, mentioned the burning of the library, and the Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus, 330 AD to 395 AD, does the same in the 4th century AD. In short, a bibliography was created from scratch, that the library was destroyed. The unhistorical obsessions of all those who tried to convince us that the Library of Alexandria burned down, and with it the luminous spirit that was on its shelves was extinguished, led the scholarly work of the late academician and former president of the Hellenic Republic, Michael Statsinopoulos, to write a newspaper article. He said, "One of the most important events in world history is the destruction of the Library of Alexandria, which contained the most important material of what the knowledge of the wise men of antiquity had treasured." However, Julius Caesar does not mention the event in his history. Historians end up establishing the sad event from Antony's gesture of later giving Cleopatra the Library of Pergamum. Strange silence surrounds such an event. In the judgment of a Roman general, the burning of the library was of less importance than battles and conquests, and yet Caesar was a cultured man, and moreover, he was a historian. What does the late academician tell us? That modern historians concluded that the Library of Alexandria was burned from Antony's gesture to give Cleopatra the Library of Pergamum. If it's possible that this can be considered scientific thought, something that is emphasized by Oscar de Wertheimer, author of the classic book Cleopatra, who points out the gap that exists in the burning of the library and confirms that the location and the cause of the destruction can only be done by speculation and in an indirect way. And this, of course, leaves a lot of room for the imagination and ingenuity of various authors who have dealt with the subject. And one must admit that the research is very attractive, both for the cause and for the dating of the destruction. To summarize, we would say that no reliable source refers to the total destruction of the Library of Alexandria. The library remained intact throughout the Ptolemaic era, and Julius Caesar was not only not responsible for its alleged burning, on the contrary, inspired by its greatness, he had the initiative to establish the first public library in Rome. Unfortunately, some unhistorical historians, copying each other, create bibliography, and without checking the sources from which they draw their information, they came to arbitrary conclusions such as this of Antony's gesture of offering Cleopatra the Library of Pergamum as a gift. Besides, Strabo, who was distinguished for his bibliophile sensibilities, visited the library after Caesar's departure from Alexandria without making any comment that even hinted at any adventure in its collection. And this article is from Kostas Spinos, published in the magazine Elinorama. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support. My Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.